right, good morning, everyone. Everyone having a good time at reInvent? This is actually my first reInvent. I spent most of my career on the Microsoft side of technology, so this has been interesting to kind of compare some of the big Microsoft conferences with AWS and Amazon. So I'm excited to be here. My name is Colin Dembowski. I'm the Director of Field Services for GitHub Copilot. So I spend my entire days meeting with products and with our field services teams and with customers and with partners and discuss all of the things that we're building and we're helping customers with in this age of AI. So I'll go through a little bit of my journey. I will say that I'm from South Africa and I want to clear up, I'm from South Africa originally, I'm based outside of Houston now, but I want to clear up that I don't have the accent, all have the accent, all right, so just want to make sure that we clear that up. But I've been with GitHub for about 4 years, just over 4 years. I was a solution engineer for most of that time before taking on this role. And as you can imagine, over the last 4 years, most of our discussions have been very heavily weighted towards Copilot. We actually do have a whole platform in GitHub. We've got advanced security, which you'll see some of today. We've got the biggest CI/CD platform in the world with GitHub Actions. So we actually do have a whole platform. But of course, Copilot is dominating that and dominating the minds of our customers. So what I'm going to do today is I want to just take a kind of a journey through a little bit of computer science history. This is not meant to be comprehensive, but I think it's useful to just frame where we are in the industry. I'll give you some insights into what I'm seeing as trends in the industry, what I'm seeing with some of my customers, and show you what we're planning for, what we're building towards in the future. So that'll help frame what we're doing with GitHub Copilot. And then we'll end off with a couple of demos and I'll take some questions. So that's what we'll do this morning. So I want to start with this slide here, and maybe by show of hands, if you don't mind dating yourself, does anyone know what this is? Yeah, okay, so I see a few hands. Thank you for your service. But these are punch cards. And if you think about 40, 50 years ago, so not that long ago, this is how developers or programmers programmed computers. And the punch card on the left there, you can kind of see there's holes punched out of it. And those are zeros. And where there's not a hole, it's a 1. So you were literally programming in binary by punching holes into a card. And then you would put these cards in order. And so on the right-hand side, you can see a box. So that is a program because it's a series of cards. And you would feed those cards into the computer to program that computer. So I like to pause at this stage and ask a rhetorical question that you can think about a little bit. And the question is, how long do you think it took developers who use this method to program computers to become productive developers? Or maybe another way of phrasing it was, how long do you think it took to go from idea to deployment when this was how you programmed computers? All right, so we're probably talking months, assuming you didn't drop your stack of cards and forget which order they were in. All right, but you can see how this was great for the beginning of computers, but would have taken a very long time to get any idea into production. So we had some very smart people in the industry, and they decided, well, these punch card things are not that great. What if we took a typewriter, essentially, and put it in front of the computer, and then at least we didn't need punch cards. We could actually use the keys on the typewriter to type in, and we could use the printer as a screen, right? You don't see any monitors there. The printer that printed the paper was the monitor that you would use to see what the computer was doing and to see the outputs. And these two gentlemen here are Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Anyone know what these folks are famous for? C? Oh, well, what did Ken Thompson invent before C? B, yes, all right, and Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson worked on Unix, all right? So this was slightly better. Again, I'll pause and ask a question. When you had a typewriter and a dot matrix printer, remember the sound of those dot matrix printers, right? When that was how you interfaced with computers, how long did it take you to go from idea to production? How long did it take you to become a productive developer? It's probably still in months or weeks, all right? So now I'll fast forward a little bit to the early 1990s when I was in high school, and this was the first programming language that I ever learned. This was Turbo Pascal 7. Any Turbo Pascal fans out there? Yeah. Anyone a fan of C# or TypeScript? Well, they're all written by Anders Helsbrand, who's invented Turbo Pascal, right? So, but for you youngins in the audience here, when you wanted to program back in the 90s, you literally bought a compiler. So that is Turbo Pascal, and it came on a couple of disks that you would have to feed into the computer to load the compiler on. And then when you wanted to figure out, how do I do a function call? How do I do a for loop? How do I pass arguments? You had to open up those things on the left-hand side there. They're called books. They have pages, and you have to like turn them, right? And that's how you would learn programming, is you would open up these books and you would learn the programming concepts. Now, up until this stage, you've got monitors and you've got computers with 640K of memory and a 20 megabyte hard drive and a 16 color grayscale or 16 grayscale monochrome monitor, right? So these were still pretty advanced times during the 90s. But again, you're still talking weeks or months to go from idea to deployment. Anyway, then I studied computer science at a small university college in South Africa, in a town called Grahamstown, called Rhodes University. It was a great time. I did 6 years there doing a master's degree in computer science. I had an absolute blast. And then I got into the real world where I had to be a programmer and had to actually put some of that learning into use. And the first company I ever joined, they were Linux C++, and we wrote back-end systems for internet service providers, right? So if you think back to the early 2000s when you signed up for internet services, you got things like inboxes and antivirus, and you got all these other services that came, and we wrote the systems that these internet service providers would use to provision services to their customers. It was all Linux and C++ and Corba, if anyone remembers Corba. But I put this up here because there were no such things as IDEs. You were essentially typing code into a text file. And this actually has syntax highlighting because I generated in VS Code. And the editors I had back then in the early 2000s didn't even have syntax highlighting. But you can see all the printfs all over the place. Anyone ever do printf debugging? Right, yeah, you had to put entering method, the value of iterator is, exiting method, and you put little timers to see which methods were going fast or slow, or then you would run the application and all these logs would scroll down the console, and then you would scratch through all of those logs to figure out what was going on in your program, right? So we're definitely getting higher level programming here, but again, it still takes a long time to do anything productive, and there's a long time from idea to production. My second job was at a company. It was a financial services company. We had about 25 developers when I joined, and they brought me on as a senior developer, and they gave me Visual Studio. Anyone a Visual Studio user here? Okay, a couple of hands. Thank you for admitting that. But Visual Studio was a fantastic editor. It still is a great editor. I use VS Code now because it's a little bit more lightweight, but Visual Studio is a great editor. But being able to set a breakpoint, right, and actually stop the application while it was running. You don't see any printfs anywhere there, but I was able to stop the program, see what the variables were, and that made me a much faster developer because I didn't have to litter my program with printfs all over the place. And so now we're talking probably weeks, right? Our deploy cycles were about measured in about weeks, all right? And then I put this XKCD cartoon up here because I got into DevOps consulting, right? That company I joined, they were using zip files for source control. And I was like, well, I might not know much about the Microsoft stack, but there's got to be a better way of doing source control. And so I opened up a web crawler, this was like pre-Google, and found this tool called Team Foundation Server 2005 Beta 2, which is a precursor to Azure DevOps as it's known today. And I got that installed and got our team onto source control, and then eventually automated builds, and eventually unit testing and work item tracking and all of the software development things that we take for granted today. So in the early 2000s, these were quite novel concepts, right? And so I remember Friday afternoons, we would get together. We had a couple of scripts, but you would still have to run them. So we called it auto manual, right? Because we were running scripts manually. And we would have someone was grilling meat, and if your commit broke the build, you didn't get to eat. Well, that was our rule, all right? So I put that up there because I love this XKCD cartoon, because back in those days, to do a compile actually took a lot of time and energy, and it took you away from doing development work. But at least it made you slightly faster than if you had to right-click and publish, right? One of my friends used to say, friends don't let friends right-click publish out of Visual Studio. So we were getting into automated builds, and This was around the time that agile was really taking off in the industry. My blog is called Colin's ALM Corner because back then we spoke about application lifecycle management. So this was before the term DevOps was coined, right? So I kind of wish my blog was now Colin's DevOps Corner or something, but Colin's ALM Corner is nostalgic, so I'll just keep it there. But so I spent the next decade of my career helping teams move from waterfall into agile so that they could deploy quicker, that they could go from idea to production faster. This blog post is actually from the GitHub blog. It's dated 2008. And one of the early founders of GitHub put this little blog post up and said, oh yeah, there's pull requests now. So if you did not know who created the pull request or invented the pull request, it was actually GitHub. So in 2008, we invented the pull request. And of course, most of us nowadays, the pull request is really the center of our entire development workflow. But even back in those days, in 2008, GitHub was on the forefront of innovation for software delivery. This was also around the time when open source really started taking off and taking the industry by storm. So again, I'm going to do a little bit of a fast forward to 2021. So I put this blog post up. It's dated February 23rd, 2022. When we put out a blog post saying that we're introducing the world to this technical preview of this little product called GitHub Copilot. Anyone using Copilot today? All right, I see a lot of hands, which is great. All right, so I put this up here because most people back in February of 2022 did not know what an LLM was. They had no idea what transformers were. They had no idea what generative AI was. But we were already experimenting with this. In fact, I joined GitHub in September of 2021 and remember using GitHub Copilot in December of 2021 doing the advent of code, which I'll talk about in a couple seconds. But it was only really 9 months after this blog post in November of 22 that ChatGPT blew up and became kind of a household name when OpenAI released it to the public, and suddenly everyone knew what models and LLMs and generative AI was. But we're certainly about a year ahead of that, right? And so I put this up here, again, just to show that this came out of a group inside of GitHub called GitHub Next. It's sort of our R&D division that are always doing pretty radical things, but they were the brains behind GitHub Copilot, and I wanted to show that we're leading in those innovations. All right, anyone here ever done the advent of code? All right, a couple of hands. All right, this is really fun. Actually, I haven't even looked at this year's competition yet, but there's a guy that creates these puzzles, and there's 2 puzzles a day from the 1st to the 25th of December, and you can solve them however you want with whatever programming language you want, and they get progressively more difficult. So last year I made it up to day 19 before I gave up, but that's how I learned how to use GitHub Copilot, was doing advent of code in December of 2021. Highly recommend you check it out. If you're on leave and bored, you may want to check out Advent of Code. It's really fun little exercises that you can do. But I used a TypeScript repo and was like, hey, what can Copilot do to help me solve these problems? And this was back in the stone ages of GitHub Copilot. Well, it feels like the stone age. It was actually sort of 3 and a bit years ago where we had code completion. All right, and that was how we started with GitHub Copilot, was where a human was writing in a code file, right, in a TypeScript file or a C# file or a Java file or whatever file you were in, and you wrote a comment or you opened up a bracket to start a function, and the Copilot would inject a suggestion for you. And I remember the first time I ever got a completion, it was mind-blowing. I was like, how did it know that that was what I was going to type, right? And so there was this magical feeling about the power of Copilot and code completions. So I wanted to come back to the XKCD cartoon where developers are slacking off because there's a compiler, and I want to give an updated version of the XKCD cartoon. All right, and this is probably something that you've heard a lot of at this conference, and if you look at Google or Microsoft or OpenAI or any of these top companies, everyone's talking about agents, agents, agents. A year ago, it was models, models, models. Now models are more or less a commodity. Everyone's talking agent, agent, agent. And now we have this world where the agent is working on your behalf. And what is the point of this? It's to make you a faster, more productive developer. It's to shorten that time from idea to deployment. That is the goal, that should be the goal of what the agents are doing. So we think about these waves. I'll talk a little bit more about these waves, but wave one was that pair programmer paradigm with code completion, where a human is in the forefront in a text file and you're having code completions. And then we're moving into wave two, a little bit into flavors of wave three, where the wave two is where the agents have become a lot more capable and they're able to work more autonomously. And that opens up new opportunities where they can work asynchronously. You can give them whole tasks now and get them to complete those tasks on your behalf asynchronously. And that's giving birth to what we're referring to as the agentic SDLC. All right, and so how do we think about how agents are changing the software delivery lifecycle? How are they actually making us more productive? Or are they actually making us more productive? Is something we spend a lot of our time and effort thinking about. And we're moving towards wave three, which is these hybrid teams, where you'll have teams of developers working with fleets of agents to deploy, and again, get from idea to deploy as quickly as possible. All right, so I wanted to show some data. This is from our own internal analysis of GitHub Copilot across all of our customers. And those bars there are showing a couple of things. So on the left-hand side is non-Copilot, right? And so we've divided up each of those bars into the median, the high, and the top 10% of developers, right? And so you can kind of see on the left-hand side, there's some velocity there, and of course the high-performing developers have a larger velocity or larger throughput than other developers. And then you add CCA, which is Copilot Coding Agent, which is our asynchronous agent, where you can give it a task and it will go away and complete that task autonomously. You can see that the throughput increases. And if we then enable CCR, well, Copilot with CCA is on the right-hand side, right? So the middle one is just using Copilot in your editor. The one on the right is using Coding Agent. And you can see when developers start to use Copilot and the asynchronous coding agent, their throughput and their productivity starts to skyrocket. The contribution graph on the right-hand side, or the contribution numbers on the right-hand side, are from the repo GitHub, which is the main mono repo for the GitHub platform. And you can see the number 2 there is 397 contributions. All right, that is in a 1-month period. So our highest human contributed about 400 contributions to GitHub. But Copilot Coding Agent did 5x of that. All right, so 1,500 contributions. And coming in a strong third place is the Copilot Code Review Agent. So internally, we are using Coding Agent and Code Review Agent very heavily to augment our teams and to improve our velocity. So we're dogfooding that. We consider ourselves to be customer zero for Copilot and the rest of our platform. We use GitHub to build GitHub. We use GitHub very heavily internally. But we see from our stats and from looking at the data science behind pull requests, we see 20% faster merges with Copilot Code Review, right? So if your lead time when you open a pull request to when you close a pull request is 5 days without code review, we're seeing that when you enable Code Review Agent, you're going to shrink that from 5 days to 4 days, right? Which is a 20% improvement, right? Imagine if you're taking 20 or 25 days to close your PRs. If you can get a 20% improvement, you're getting down to 10 or 15 days, right? And that's just Code Review Agent, never mind Coding Agent or Copilot. So we're seeing the proof is in the pudding, and we're seeing that across the board. Of course, you can get more if you're more intentional about it. So hopefully I can give you some ideas today about how to be more intentional so that you can really maximize the gains and the productivity improvements you'll get from our platform. All right, but there's a challenge, because if Copilot is helping you create more code faster, that means you have more to plan, you have more to review, you have more to test and scan, you have more to operate, and you have more to integrate, especially if you've got disparate tools across your SDLC. All right, and the integration, as one of my computer science professors used to say, interchangeable parts don't. All right, I have a lot of customers throughout my years as a DevOps consultant that had, some of them, there was a swing where everyone wanted one system that did everything, and then there was a swing to well, we want the best in breed tools and we'll just integrate them, right? And that never seemed to work out because you end up spending a lot of time on the integration instead of solving your business problems and your customers' problems. So we don't want you to do that. So our vision is to be the backbone of your SDLC. We always build with integration and APIs for other tools when you need them. But we want to be that backbone for your entire SDLC, not just in the code generation space. All right, so Copilot started to help code generation, but we're thinking very deeply about how can we bring agentic capabilities to planning, to reviewing, to testing and securing, and to operating. And that's what I want to go over in this next section. So again, I'll bring up these waves. These 4 waves are actually defined by Microsoft, and we've kind of adopted some of their language there. So again, that wave 1 was assistance, where you can think of, I'm in a code file and I'm getting assistance from code completion. Then there's augmentation, where I'm able to get the agent to edit multiple files at the same time. So there's augmentation. And then there's orchestration, which is kind of where we are now with autonomous agents. And how can we get these agents to run autonomously and asynchronously and in a multi-threaded fashion. And then wave 4 would be full autonomy, right? Where we actually trust these agents to go completely from end to end, where agents are talking to agents. And that's where we're headed. That's where we see the industry going. So we're somewhere in the wave 2 to wave 3. We've got pieces of wave 4. So what I want to do for the next couple of slides is show you just a conceptual vision of what it could look like when you're in wave 4. And again, we have a lot of the pieces today, but I wanted to give you sort of an aspirational vision of what we're trying to build for you. All right, so let's imagine that you have a brainstorming agent and you're going to brainstorm some feature or some bug fix. You're going to create a plan with a work breakdown, and all of this is being done with the agent's help. Then you're going to pass all of those tasks to coding agents, which are going to actually do the coding. So they're going to take all of those tasks from your plan and code them up. And then they'll pass the coding changes to security and quality agents that are going to check that there are no vulnerabilities, that there are no vulnerable dependencies, that the quality is good. And then you're going to have a human review, right? Because we still believe very strongly in human in the loop. So the human will review. And then once you're deployed, we envision SRE agents, site reliability engineer agents, right? Microsoft has an SRE agent on the Azure platform. We saw this week in the keynote that Amazon released the DevOps agent, which is the same idea. How can we use the agents to monitor production environments and then feed that back into the lifecycle? So you can imagine that happening across one work stream, across one sprint team, and then you can have that in parallel across multiple work streams within that team. While the team is going, the SRE agent, or whatever flavor it is, finds an issue in production, grabs the context from that issue, logs it back as an issue to assign to coding agent, which then has all the context it needs to go and fix that issue, goes back through the scanning and securing, and there's human review, and you deploy out. And then you can imagine this going across multiple teams and multiple business units across your engineering teams. So that's kind of the high-level vision of what we're trying to create and what we're trying to get to. And so we want to bring those agentic capabilities not just to code generation to make developers faster, but how can we help you plan faster? How can we help you secure and build trust in what the agents are producing faster? How can we get you faster mean time to remediate and all of those good DevOps practices? How can we make you faster with the power of these agents? So that's what we're ultimately building. Let's see here. Anyone go or watch Universe 2025? Does anyone know what Universe is? Okay, there's a couple hands. All right, so Universe is our equivalent of reInvent. It's our annual conference. It happens late October every year in San Fran. So we had Universe 2025 about, 4 weeks ago-ish, somewhere around there. And if I had to summarize all of the ships and announcements we made, it would be the simple sentence, the rise of agents. And that's really summarizing what we have been working on for the last 6 to 8 months and all of the announcements that we made. So I want to go through some of those. Again, I'm trying to paint a picture here so that you understand what we're doing, because we're shipping fast, we're shipping a lot, and so we often hear that customers get overwhelmed with all of the changes that we're throwing at them, and I'm trying to give you a framework here so how you can think about what we're doing and building. So again, I've spoken about this a little bit, that we're accelerating coding, which is kind of in the middle of your SDLC, your software delivery lifecycle, is can I produce faster code, or can I produce code faster? Can I get the agents or the coding assistant to take mundane tasks off my hands so that I can be more creative, do more high-value work? And so I would say we've been doing a really good job of that. But what we wanted to do is also look at how can we clarify intent? How can we shift left into more planning work? How can we get agents to help with that? And so we released a planning agent, which I'll demo. We've also got the brainstorming agent coming soon. So we're thinking about how we can shift those agentic capabilities into that plan phase, even before you start coding, right? And anyone who's used any of these coding agents, you'll know that when you say, build me an app, you get very mediocre results. But when you say, I need an app that does, and you specify what you want the app to do and what you want the stack to look like and how you want it to work and how you develop and what your standards are, you get much better results. So it's all about clarifying the intent early on so that you get better results. And then if we look to the right, it doesn't help if we help you create code and code changes faster if you have to spend more time securing and validating and checking quality and validating the output of those agents and of those agent workflows. So what are we doing to help build trust so that you know once it's got through your gates and your quality bars that you are confident you can deploy? So how are we doing that? And that's really what we've been thinking about. One more concept I want to cover here, which I think is really important, is we're seeing a shift from synchronous, single-threaded, single-player development. Right? Think of a developer sitting in VS Code or sitting with Kiro, whatever it is, and you're doing a task. Typically that task is one task at a time, and that agent is taking over your IDE, so it's synchronous, and it's typically one developer, it's single player. But we're seeing a shift away into multi-threaded, asynchronous, and multiplayer, right? So maybe we've got a breakdown of 8 or 10 tasks. We can farm those off to agents simultaneously, and the agents can do all of that work at the same time. And how does that change the dynamic of what we do as software engineers from a day-to-day perspective? And so we made this announcement at GitHub Universe. We call this Agent HQ because we want GitHub to be the headquarters of every agentic workflow. Now, this isn't actually a product. You're not going to go into GitHub and click on the Agent HQ tab because GitHub is the Agent HQ. And so what we announced is we have today, if you go and give a task to coding agent, you're using the Copilot coding agent. But what if you're a Claude Code fan? Anyone here a fan of Claude Code? All right. Well, what if you want to run your asynchronous workflows with Claude Code? Well, just like we think models are a commodity, you want to use Gemini, you want to use Claude models, you want to use Anthropic models, we're going to enable that. We think agents are going to be commodity as well. So if you want to use Copilot, you'll get some advantages, but if you prefer Claude, we want to enable that. And so in the next couple of weeks, you will have the ability to assign issues asynchronously to Claude Code or to Jules or to XAI, whatever agent you want to in the GitHub platform. So it'll still be where your source code is, it'll still be in your workflow, and we will enable that for you. And so I'll show you some of the advantages you get with Copilot Coding Agent, but if you want to use other agents, we're going to build the platform that will support that. But what about governance? Anyone here have like security or compliance teams that make sure that you do the right thing? Okay, yeah. So as developers, we have to deal with those folks. And how do those folks actually manage at scale? How can they put into place policies and procedures and all of the vetting that they need to do across different models and agents? How can they do all of that? Well, we've got something called the agent control plane, which is the kind of the administrator's view. And so the administrator can go into a single place to approve the set of models that your company is comfortable using. They can define custom models. If you've got your own models or you've got other model providers that you want to use, you can put those in there. You can define policies. You can define custom agents. That's all defined in a single place we call the agent control plane. So this is kind of what the administrators and the compliance team would be using to get comfortable at scale with what we're building. But for developers, you want a single place where you can see all of the threads that you've started, right? If you're going to really go into multi-threaded development, you might have 8 or 10 or 12 things going at the same time. How do you see where those are, how far they are, what files have been changed? and that's what we call mission control. And I'll show you what mission control looks like. We have that in the web, and we have that in Visual Studio Code as well. It's early days for us, but we're trying to build this place where you can start managing and orchestrating all of this multi-threaded work. All right, so we'll put this slide up quickly. So this shows kind of all of the actual features. So if you go into GitHub, you will see things like autofix and code quality and coding agent and agent mode. So these are actually all of the features, and we've tried to put them more or less in the phases of the life cycle. We really would hope that everyone would use all of these tools, because we think there's some economies of scale that you get across all of them. But again, if you prefer another coding agent, we're going to make sure that we build in the correct integration points for that. All right, let's see. I'll mention a bit of metrics. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So we do have metrics that will show how many users are using premium models, what are the most popular models that your developers are using, are they using coding agent or code review agent. So we've got the beginnings of metrics, and we're starting off on the left-hand side with measuring usage and adoption. That's really the focus of our metrics. And we're moving towards taking the usage metrics and actually helping you change or helping you measure impact. Again, internally, we've started with pull request lead time. How long does it take from when you open a pull request to when it's merged? And can we see any trends when you're using Copilot to create the pull request or using Copilot Code Review to review the request? And the answer is yes, we see those trends, but we want to start getting those trends and those metrics into the hands of our users so that you can start measuring that yourself in our dashboards and in our APIs. All right, a couple more slides just to show some of the releases that we made, and then I'll jump into some demos. So we think of agents as accelerators. So I've mentioned third-party agents, which is coming soon in the next couple of weeks. I've mentioned mission control. We've got the Copilot coding agent, which I'll show. We've got custom agents. Anyone using our Claude skills, right? So that's kind of similar Claude skills. It's just a markdown file that you can use to tell the agent how you want it to do a very particular task, right? And so again, I'll demo that. We've got Copilot Code Review. Copilot Code Review before Universe, so up until about a month ago, we would take the diff inside a PR, we would pass that to the agent, we'd say, please do a review, and we had a system prompt about how to do that review. What we have added now is we've added what we call agentic capabilities. So now Code Review will run in an action, so it'll actually start up a runner, and so it actually has an environment where it can execute tasks like linters and code scanners. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but Copilot Code Review will now give you the best of non-deterministic, asking a model to do the review, and deterministic tools like linters and our code scanning tool. And of course, we've had agent mode for a while. All right, so I wanted to put this slide up here because I like to use this as an example of how we are trying to help our customers actually think about development in new ways. So I'll show you this demo. We have a website called Octocat Supply. It's a React Node.js application, sort of e-commerce application, and the demo that I've been doing for ages with my customers is, and I'll show you some of that demo, not the whole thing, but there's no cart page. You can go to the product page and you can add products in, and there's just a placeholder. And I walk through how we can use Copilot Coding Agent or Agent Mode or Code Completions to help build out this cart page. But one day I was thinking about, well, why am I only building one cart page? What if I don't know what the best cart page design is? What if I wanted to experiment with multiple cart pages? Well, before coding agents, I'd probably get my team together and we'd discuss several variations, and then we'd pick one before we even start, right? Because we don't have time to do all three. We don't have 3 teams that can do the same work. But because we now have agents, we are at a place where we can say, all right, I got Copilot Coding Agent Plan Mode to plan 3 different variations of the cart page and create an issue for each variant, and then assigned it to Copilot, and Copilot went to work on 3 different variations at the same time, and about 25 minutes later, I had 3 different versions of the cart page. Now, those screenshots there are actually taken as Copilot Coding Agent was working. It spins up the Playwright MCP server, and it interacts with the website, and it actually takes a screenshot, and it puts it into the body of the PR. And so you can actually see just in the body of the PR, the 3 different variations. Of course, there's all the code there. They're on separate branches, so I could check them out if I wanted to. If I had a feature flag system, like a launch darkly or something like that, I could actually deploy all 3 and do load balancing and all of that thing. But the point is that this is a new muscle memory for developers, because we should start thinking about, why should I only do 1 variant? Let me do 3 or 4 or 5, because Agent can take that offline for me. We also have anywhere you want to access Copilot Coding Agent from, we want to enable that. So we announced the Copilot CLI. Anyone using Copilot CLI? No one. All right, I'll have to show that to you. Copilot CLI. So if you're a terminal warrior and you don't like IDEs, you can use Copilot in your CLI. We have plan mode in VS Code. We've got the GitHub MCP registry. Anyone using MCP servers? Anyone having a trouble securing which MCP servers your teams can use? Okay, yeah. So we've got the MCP registry. We're on the steering committee for the MCP protocol. So some of our engineers work very closely with Anthropic to help evolve that spec. And we think MCP is a really important part of this future. So we've got a lot of goodness around MCP and MCP registries and whitelisting servers and compliance and all of the good things that enterprises want. We also have Copilot for Slack and Teams and for Azure Boards and Linear if you're using those tools for work item tracking. So this might be a little bit difficult to see, but I actually took this screenshot from a thread internally where one of our DevRel advocates had asked a question about configuration for Coding Agent. And he was like, well, the docs say I can do this, but I'm struggling to do it. And Tim, who's the product manager for Coding Agent, responded in the thread to say, oh, actually, no, that's a typo or a mistake in our docs file. And then he said, at GitHub Copilot, go and fix this doc. And that invoked Copilot Coding Agent, which grabbed the thread, so it had all the context, created a pull request, and you can see the green button about 3/4 of the way down that says, go and view this PR. And so all Tim had to do was go and view PR, do the review, and it was fixed. So we're enabling Copilot Coding Agent from wherever you're working, be that Slack or Teams or mobile. This morning, I had a workflow that I'm using for some internal automation, and I was getting spammed because that's on a schedule that every 15 minutes it runs. And I made an update and didn't test it thoroughly, bad me. But I was getting spammed because every 15 minutes the workflow was failing and I was getting an email. And so while I was walking over here this morning, I opened up my mobile and I copied the error from the workflow run and I put it into Coding Agent to say, Coding Agent, here's the error I'm getting, go and fix the workflow. By the time I got here, I went to Starbucks to have a cup of coffee, and as I was sipping my coffee at Starbucks, I opened up the pull request, saw that it had fixed it, merged it in, and now I no longer have any spam from a failing workflow because Coding Agent fixed it for me while I was going over to the Mandalay Bay. That's what we're trying to enable, is anywhere you want to work, anywhere you want to get results, we want to enable that with Coding Agent. All right, but we also want to ship code that lasts. It doesn't help if we create code and you don't trust that code. So what we're doing is we're integrating GitHub Advanced Security, which is our AppSec tooling suite, into Coding Agent. So every time Coding Agent is working on a PR, it's going to run tests. It's going to make sure that the tests pass. It's going to run the review cycle, so it'll actually review the code and get input from the review and then fix that. We're going to run our CodeQL scanning tool, which is our SAST tool, our static analysis scanning tool. We will do secret protection, and we will also invoke Copilot Autofix, which is the first agent we actually had on our platform that would help you to resolve security vulnerabilities. So we're building all of those security features into every run of Copilot Coding Agent and also the code review agent. So I'll show you what that looks like. And I've mentioned most of these before, so I'm just going to skip this slide. All right, let's switch over to a quick demo, and then I'll see if I've got time for a couple questions. All right. Let's see. All right. So this is that Octocat supply application. And if I open this up, this is it running. So if I click on products and add a product to the cart, you can see there's just this little pop-up that says I've added an item to the cart. And so let me show you the repo where I created a couple of issues or pull requests. So again, I used planning mode, which I'll show in a couple seconds, to go and plan 3 different variations of that cart page. And then each one of those variations I assigned to Copilot. So if we go and click on Design C, this is the pull request from that. And you can see a nice summary here of everything that was changed and updated. There's the screenshot in the body of the PR. And I can also go all the way down here to the full session. Let me see if I can find the session. All right, so if I click View Session, this is going to take me to Mission Control. All right, so this is the panel where we will see the full log, and this includes everything. At the bottom, you can see the full summary, but I can see the entire log, and so I can see exactly what the agent was thinking as it was running. This first couple of steps here are custom setup steps, because I have a particular version of Node.js, and so I want Coding Agent to use that. And so we have a little workflow file that you can specify to set up the environment for Coding Agent. And then we can see it viewing files, right? So it's doing an ls just to view all the files. When we view an actual file, let me see if I can find a file, right? When we, okay, the path does not exist. All right, this is an older repo. But we can see every time it creates a file, you can see the diff there for the file that created. On the right-hand side, you can see all of the files that were changed, and you can add comments here. And then this box at the bottom here, this session has completed already, but I could add another instruction here for agent to go and do additional work. If the session was actually running, I could add an instruction here midstream. All right, so if I see agent starts going a little bit into rabbit holes that I don't want it to do, then I can do mid-steering from this panel over here. And here I get to see all of the threads that I have queued off for Coding Agent. So that's mission control. Let's go back to the repo here. And I want to click on security because I want to show code quality, right? So code quality is new, and at the moment we have sort of 2 pivots for quality. We've got maintainability and reliability. And so what we'll do is we do security scanning, but then this is actually quality scanning. So anyone here using SonarQube? All right, so this is kind of what SonarQube does, except we're trying to do it a little bit better than SonarQube does. All right, and so you can see the warnings below here, and we can create policies that will block this PR from being merged if there are any errors in the quality scans. But if I open this up, let me open up one of these alerts. So let me see if I can click on that. All right, not only do we show you the alert, we actually invoke the auto-fix agent to go and show the suggested fix. All right, so in this case, it's fairly simple, but there may be more complex scenarios where your developers don't know how to fix that particular issue. We use Coding Agent to do that, so I could open a pull request here, or I can just assign to Copilot. That's coming soon, so I can get Copilot to go and fix this. But if I wanted to generate a fix for this particular suggestion, I just click that button, and Copilot would go and work out what a fix would be for that particular warning. So that's our quality that's built in. Let me go over to pull requests here. I'm going to show another pull request here. We had a feature to add terms of service download. All right, so this was a human that implemented this code for this particular pull request. And on the reviewers here, you can see that I've assigned Copilot as one of the reviewers. Right? So again, you can set a policy here that every pull request gets a review automatically by a code review. But if we scroll down here in this pull request, you'll see that we get a number of warnings in line from GitHub Advanced Security. So that's our security scanning tool. All right, so it's going to highlight code where it finds a vulnerability, and then it's going to give a link to that vulnerability, and then the auto fix for how to fix that vulnerability. Right? When I was a developer, the only thing I knew about security was those were the people that blocked you from going to prod. Right? So we don't want that. We want developers to be able to fix and do the right thing quickly. And so we have the auto fix suggestion here, and so I could just commit the suggestion if I'm happy with that. All right, so there's some security vulnerabilities here, and I'll carry on going down. All right, so we're very thorough. All All right, and then you'll see that we have the code quality scan here, and this time instead of showing security vulnerabilities, we're showing quality issues, again with the auto fix suggestions that you can just commit in. And then if I keep going down, you'll see this is the pull request summary. So when code review agent does its work, it gives you a nice summary of what it sees the changes are. So as a human reviewer, this is great because it gives me a nice summary of what's going on. I can make sure that I am on the same page as code review agent or vice versa. There's even a summary per file here. And then again, there's auto fix suggestions for every time Copilot Code Review has a suggestion, it's going to make a suggestion as well. So you kind of get all of that enabled either per repo or at the org level for all your repos. So we want to enable security and quality at scale. Let me see if there's any other demos I want to do. All right, so I'll show you here. If I go back to the code repo here, or to the code page on the repo, you'll see this little panel here where I can either chat with Copilot across this repo. So say I'm a new developer and I'm trying to find out how is this repo laid out, right? I might want to just open up a chat session, but then there's also this agents panel, and if I open up that, this is where I can enter in a task. I want a new feature, I want the download, the cart page, or whatever it is. And you'll also see that there are custom agents here. If I click on this, you can see that there's a number of custom agents. These are just markdown files that live either at the repo or at a special GitHub private repo at the org level. And you can see I've got TDD, for example. So I can do test-driven development here. I've got a TDD planner to plan out the scenarios. I've got TDD red to go and write the failing tests, and I've got TDD green to go and implement the code until all the tests are passing, right? So those are the kinds of things that we can do. I've got a research bot there, so I can use that to do research, etc. All right. I wanted to show planning agent here. So let me grab this. All right, so I'm going to, again, use the cart page, and I've got the text there for how I want the cart page to look. I'm going to drag an image in here because this model actually supports vision. So let me go through docs, design. Here's the cart page. That's what I want it to look like. A designer might have given that to me, so I'm going to just drag that in. I'm using Claude Opus 4.5, but in the model picker, you'll see all of the models that we give you access to, or that your admin has enabled, I should say. But I'm using Claude Opus 4.5, which is a really cool model. And here under agent, you can see there's different modes here. These are the custom modes that I created. And then out of the box, we have agent, plan, ask, and edit. So I'll just put this into plan mode, and I'm going to get Copilot to help me plan out this feature. You notice that I didn't give it instructions about where I want the cart to be stored. Do I want an API for that? Do I want to use local storage? These are the kinds of the things that I would expect planning agent to come back with to say, all right, I see what you're trying to do, but have you thought about X and Y? And it will do that. It'll take a couple seconds for that to run. While that's going, I wanted to actually hit this configure custom agents button. And right at the bottom here, you can actually see we have the plan mode there. If I click on that, this will give you the markdown file. So this is the markdown file that ships with Visual Studio Code for plan mode. So plan mode is just a custom agent that's defined by a markdown file. So you can go and look at that. If you do something different for your planning, you can customize that so you have a custom planning mode for Copilot. And so you see Copilot is reading a bunch of files and understanding what's going on in the repository before it starts asking me clarifying questions. And then you'll see these handoffs here where the handoffs, it's going to give me two buttons, either start implementation or open in editor. If I want to actually capture the plan in a markdown file, it'll put two buttons at the bottom of that. Those are called handoffs. Again, you can use that to make your own custom modes. I did that for the TDD, where after you've done TDD planning, there's a button to say TDD red, and after you run TDD red, there's a button that says TDD green. So you can kind of start guiding your developers along these agentic workflows. Well, at least Opus is thorough. It's reading every file in that repo. All right, let's see what else. Okay, I wanted to actually show this panel here. So if I click on this panel, you see that I have chat history here. So these are all the chat sessions that I had on the right-hand side. I've got all the cloud sessions here because I can actually dispatch this to cloud using the little cloud icon here. That will go to coding agent in the repo. down here I've got CLI, right? So if I actually start a new agent session in the terminal, this will open the terminal with the really cool animation for Copilot. Ooh. All right, let's see that again. It's just so cool. I'll do it one more time. So we're going to open up multiple CLI sessions. Here it comes. All right, there's Copilot. All right, so once it's up there, this is Copilot in the CLI. So for those of you that like using Claude Code, this should feel very familiar to you. It's a terminal interface onto Copilot. And then I could give it instructions to go and do tasks. And if I have multiple of those in flight at the same time, we can track all of my CLI sessions here. So this is kind of mission control view inside of Visual Studio Code, kind of similar to what we had in mission control in the web. All right, and so you see here, we've got the plan here. I'm not going to read all of this, but there might be some questions here. Further considerations. Do you want a coupon system? What authentication? Do you need to be authenticated to add items to the cart? All right, so plan mode will help me do that. I can either just hit start implementation here, or I can start iterating, or if I hit open in editor, I think this will create a markdown file for me. So if anyone's doing spec-driven development, you could actually save that markdown file into the repo, so you kind of have a history of your planning and the decisions that you've made. All right, so I am going to pause there for questions. I hope I've given you kind of a good high-level idea of what we're trying to build with a couple of demos in there. There's so much goodness in Copilot, so I encourage you to look at the changelog. There is a filter for Copilot because there's a lot of stuff coming out. But thank you for your time. I'll take a couple questions. Anyone? Okay, someone's got a question there. You're going to have to shout, and then I'll repeat it. Okay, so I kind of caught the first half of that. There's a microphone there.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, where do you see the future of Copilot, given that Kira was being so heavily pushed?
Well, we had Coding Agent 6 months ago. Kira's just come out with the autonomous agent. There's the DevOps agent in Azure and AWS now. Azure's had one on the Microsoft side again since May of this year. So again, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they develop and where their strengths are. Again, we think agents are going to be commodity. So we don't have Kira integration yet, but I could see that on the roadmap at some point, that if you wanted to use Kira as the agent for doing whatever work, we would just integrate that in. We really think that the agents are commodities. What we're trying to build is that end-to-end platform that supports agentic autonomous work. Again, we'll have to see how that exactly plays out, but we're not particularly concerned about that. Again, we see the agents as commodity. Yep. All right, any other questions? Yes, there's one here.
What model does Copilot Code Review use? And then do you have any advice on how to structure your instructions for it? Because what the developers have noticed is if you add a bunch of instructions to a repo and you have code review on,
yep.
it turns it up to 11.
All right, so the question is, what model does Copilot Code Review use? That depends on your policies. So we will try Claude Sonnet 4.5. If you have not allowed 4.5, we will fall back to Sonnet 4. We are working on model choice for both Code Review and Coding Agent, because at the moment those are fixed pretty much between Sonnet 4.5 and GPT-5 are the models that we use for Code Review and Coding Agent. But again, you will see in the next couple of months that there'll be a model picker so that you can pick which model you want for those experiences. The instructions files, you can put them. What I do for my instructions files is in the .github Copilot instructions MD file. I typically put review guidance at the top of that file. So I have general review guidance for the entire repo here. And then you can also, in the instructions file here, this particular repo has an API, a database, and a front end. And so I've split out particular instructions for those three portions of that code base. And so API here, you can see the apply to has a glob where I'm saying if there are changes in this set of folders, then use these instructions. And again, I've got specific review instructions for the API at the top there. All right, but again, I think this is something that it doesn't matter what agent you're using. This is a challenge, is figuring out how much or how little your instructions need to be in order to get good results. If you give it too much, that can confuse the model. If you give it too little, it does its own thing. So I think this is just going to be something that's a challenge no matter what agent or model you're using. But we're hoping that we at least are giving you some of the mechanisms that you need to start separating out instructions for different portions of your repo to get better instructions there. The other thing which you'll see in the plan mode, if I can find that, is something called, did I close it? Called run sub agent. So configure custom agents, let's go to plan. Down here, you can see that we actually do what's called a sub-agent, right? Where sometimes you want the agent to do some research, but you don't want to clutter the entire conversation with all of that research. You want it to go and do its research, iterate, and then just come back with the final result. That's what the sub-agent does. It kind of starts a new thread, keeps all the context in that thread, and just comes back with the final result. So I think over time, you'll see things like code review become better as we enable sub-agents, because you're not going to have the context being blown out by the first couple of lines of code. We'll get better at managing that context through things like the sub-agent tool. Great question. All right, I think I've got time for maybe one or two more. Yep, there's one over there. There's a microphone just behind you.
Yeah, is there a way to get it to work across multiple repos, not just one repo at a time?
Yeah, I wish you hadn't asked that question. That's a great question. Again, like, this is something I keep bugging our team about. The GitHub repo is a mono repo, so our engineering team is used to working on a giant mono repo. I keep telling them that there are other companies that work differently, but that's something that, again, I think will certainly come as we iterate mission control. I think that'll be the surface where you'll see it. So you'll see something like what Kiro does, where you can put in 5 or 10 repos and have it do work across those. So we'll get there. We're trying to figure out what exactly the right interface and user experience is for that. Great question. Thanks for making it hard. All right, one more question. Yes, there you go. There's a microphone. Thank you, Elrod.
So I find myself enjoying the inline suggestions.
Yep.
I kind of get to review and scrutinize as I go. How do you, as a developer, choose between doing prompt engineering versus taking those inlines?
That is a great question. All right, so I've found the more I meet with customers over this, the more I realize this is less about the models and the technology and more about the change management. And the training and the enablement. Just like any tool or technology, you can't just give it to a developer and get good results. You need to actually spend time investing in new muscle memory, new ways of thinking. I think we want to enable whatever experience the developer wants. There's some developers that really want that. I want to be in a code file and I want to be writing code and I want to get the suggestions just for that code. And there are other developers that are like, I don't really care. I'm going to describe what I want and I want Copilot to give me results. We're trying to enable whichever design or the coding experience you prefer. I think we're probably investing more in the autonomous agent side of things because we just see that scaling a lot more because of the shift from synchronous single player, which is the code completion experience, into that I've got a set of tasks and I want Copilot to work on all of them at the same time. So I think we're leaning a little bit more to that. But we're not going to leave the code completion experience behind. Again, we think that's more or less preference. I use a bit of both. I'm probably like 90% agent mode and coding agent and about 10% code completion. Again, that's going to vary depending on your style. Yep, good question. All right. Well, I'll stick around for another minute or two, but thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference and safe travels. All right, thank you.